Lectures 10, Fostering Individuals Who Can Provide Contrarian Perspectives. This is the 10th lecture of the leadership course. In the previous lecture, I talked about how leadership is a relationship and that the relationship between a leader and their followers varies depending on the individual. Therefore, leaders should adopt different approaches for different followers, and superiors should do the same for their subordinates. However, a key question that was not addressed is how to differentiate between them. There is a simple and effective way to do this, which is to categorize them. In the business world, there is a popular and seemingly effective classification method that uses two dimensions, ability and attitude. However, this method has a major flaw that could harm truly outstanding subordinates and ultimately harm the superiors who use it. Therefore, if your superior is using this classification method, or if you are using it yourself, you need to be careful. First, I will discuss the problem with this classification method, then introduce a new and more inspiring classification method. Finally, I will distill an important leadership concept for you. 1. The ability and attitude classification method. Let me first discuss the problem with this classification method. There is an article circulating online that talks about the hiring practices of Liu Qiangdong, the founder of JD.com. Liu Qiangdong categorizes employees into 5 types. He says that those with strong abilities and good values are gold, those with good abilities and values but not outstanding are steel, those with slightly weaker abilities but good values are iron, those with poor abilities and values are scrap metal, and those with strong abilities but poor values are rust and must be removed. As you can see, Liu Qiangdong also uses the dimensions of ability and attitude. What he calls abilities and values are essentially the same thing. There is also a more Chinese way of expressing these dimensions, which is talent and virtue. Have you heard of this analogy? Those with talent and virtue are high-quality products, those without talent and virtue are waste products, those with virtue but no talent are inferior products, and those with talent but no virtue are dangerous products. Both abilities and values, or talent and virtue, refer to the same thing, ability and attitude. Employees with good abilities and attitudes should obviously be valued, while those with poor abilities and attitudes should not be used. The most difficult category is employees with strong abilities but poor attitudes. What should be done with such subordinates? According to Liu Qiangdong, these people are rust and must be removed. The other analogy mentioned earlier also describes them as dangerous products. For dangerous products, one approach is to remove them immediately, but they can also be used in a small and careful manner. For example, there are many hazardous chemicals that we sometimes need to use, but we must use them in a small and careful manner. 2. The flaw in this classification method. Is it useful to categorize employees based on their abilities and attitudes? Of course it is. However, this method has a major flaw or problem. Although this flaw is significant, it is deeply hidden and not easy to detect. Can you think of what this flaw might be? Let me give you an example and then explain the flaw. Let's say there is a university professor who teaches well but has a strange temper. How do you think the university president should treat him? Let me tell you what management guru Peter Drucker thinks. Drucker believes that the president's job is to tolerate his temper and help others tolerate it as well. However, in reality, university presidents may think differently from Drucker. What would a university president do in reality? He is more likely to say that this professor has good abilities but a bad attitude. Do you see the flaw in this classification method now? The fatal flaw in using abilities and attitudes to differentiate employees is how to judge attitudes. It is relatively easy to judge abilities, but the word attitude is too vague. If you use the term values or virtue, it is still ambiguous. What are the standards for good or bad attitudes? Who judges them? For example, if there are 2 subordinates, one who does whatever the superior asks and another who frequently provides suggestions to the superior, which subordinate has a better attitude? Therefore, Employees who are defined by their superiors as having a bad attitude may not actually have a bad attitude. They may just have a bad temper that does not affect their work, or they may have a bad attitude towards their superiors but a good attitude towards their work and other people. They may also just like to express different opinions, but in a more direct way. The ultimate result may be that superiors label employees with a bad attitude based on personal preferences. This not only harms the employees but also ultimately harms the superiors themselves. If a leader encounters this situation, subordinates will be unwilling to provide suggestions or proposals. Such a leader is prone to what we previously called the CO disease. 3. Thinking about attitude and work attitude. Using abilities and attitudes to categorize employees has a major problem. The attitude dimension is too vague and can easily go astray. Let me introduce a new classification method that is more specific and inspiring. How to view subordinates is also based on 2 dimensions. One dimension is whether subordinates have independent and critical thinking or rely on superiors to think for them. The other dimension is whether subordinates actively participate in work or passively participate. Have you noticed that these 2 dimensions of this classification method actually make attitudes more specific? It says that to determine whether an employee has a good attitude, one should look at their thinking attitude, whether they think independently, and their work attitude, whether they actively participate. According to this classification method, the best employees are those who think independently and actively participate. They will fully support superior decisions when they agree and provide constructive feedback when they disagree. This classification method was proposed by management scholar Robert Kelly, who called employees who think independently and actively participate stars. Star employees are those with good attitudes, both in thinking and work attitudes. However, have you noticed that such employees in the previous classification method are often considered to have a bad attitude because they think independently? This new classification method makes attitudes more specific and defines 2 specific attitudes that are beneficial to the company. Therefore, it is more inspiring and practical, but it is not popular in the business world. Can you guess why? Because superiors do not like this kind of classification. Independent thinking means that sometimes subordinates may disagree with their superiors. Superiors are also human and have weaknesses. If you disagree with me, how can I think of you as a star? Superiors will think that such subordinates are naysayers and have a bad attitude. 4. Fostering individuals who can provide contrarian perspectives. However, there are also a few entrepreneurs who possess a higher level of vision and have overcome their own human weaknesses, recognizing the importance of those who love to play devil's advocate. For instance, Sony Corporation's former CEO, Norio Olga, had a department manager named Shunji Udi who was not highly ranked within the company, but was highly valued by Olga. Udi was a person who loved to challenge authority, and was not afraid to disagree with his superiors. Rather than disliking him for this, Olga appreciated him for it. However, Udi could not always play devil's advocate. During meetings, he occasionally agreed with everyone else, which would upset Olga and prompt him to criticize Udi, saying, "Why did we invite you to participate? We wanted you to challenge our views." Olga was remarkable in that he consciously cultivated a person who played devil's advocate within the company. Here is another example of encouraging devil's advocacy. Management guru Peter Drucker once told a story about his early research on General Motors and his admiration for its then-president, Alfred Sloan. During a meeting with executives to discuss a decision, everyone agreed on the same course of action. Sloan said, "Since there are no objections, let's not make a decision on this matter now. Let's revisit it in 3 months." Sloan was wise enough to know that without devil's advocacy, the decision was not fully considered. An organization does not necessarily need a designated devil's advocate. This is not very practical, as such a person is often seen as having a bad attitude and is quickly removed. Of course, if there is such a person, they should be cherished. If there is no such person, devil's advocacy should still be encouraged, or at least tolerated. The most important conclusion of the new employee classification system we introduced is to encourage devil's advocacy. This goes against human nature and requires us to cultivate our leadership skills.